So this is probably going to be one of the most complex Yu-Gi-Oh videos to make because Jaden and Yubel have some of the most abilities out of any Yu-Gi-Oh protagonist or just any Yu-Gi-Oh character, period. And he's also one of the protagonists that just does the most amount of things. Like, as we'll get into this video, there's just so many different things and so many different levels of power you could scale Jaden to, so many different inverse tiers, because he just does a lot of really whack things. But I know this is one of the videos that a lot of you guys have been looking forward to, because ever since I did the Yami Yugi video, everybody's been clamoring, asking me when are we going to get the Jaden video. And I bet it's because a lot of you guys know that a lot of the good Yu-Gi-Oh scaling starts to come from GX. Because if we just looked at dual monsters by itself, you would only have them being about planetary. But then you come over to the GX era and, well, things start to get really impressive very, very quickly. But you guys know how we do things over here on the Bleach Hub channel. We're going to go over Jaden's strength, speed, and abilities, and then maybe add some closing thoughts at the very end of the video. If you guys enjoy this type of power scaling content, make sure you leave a like on the video and subscribe to the YouTube channel, because the channel is now morphing into this half and half dynamic where half of it is Bleach power scaling videos and the other half is just covering those really OP solo your favorite verse type of characters. So if you either like Bleach or just really OP broken characters, then go ahead and subscribe to your boy. Now, with that being said, I encourage everybody to just strap up, buckle in, get your popcorn, because this is going to be one of those long videos. Because like I said, Jaden and Yubel have a stupid amount of abilities, and they also fight a lot of different characters, so the scaling is out the wazoo. But with all that being said, let's just go ahead and dive right on into this, starting off with Jaden's strength. So one of the things that we first got to establish is going into this video is that GX takes the concept of the game being real from Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters and just greatly expands upon it in their series, because in Duel Monsters you had this source of conflict between Atem and Kaiba, where Atem believed that the game was more than a game, it was actually real life, and Kaiba was like, this is some occult mumbo jumbo, I don't care about it, I just want to be the best duelist on the planet. And obviously the series proves that Atem is right. They show numerous times that it's more than a game, with the Egyptian god cards, characters like the Dark Magician acting of its own volition to protect Yugi in his duel against Arcana. You also have some instances of like Joey when he's possessed by Merrick telling Red Eyes to attack him and stuff like that. But it's very subtle, and I understand people kind of missing out on that because they still try to leave it as it is just a card game with subtle hints of the occult juju nonsense. And they really don't double down on that until the very end of the series with Millennium Worlds, where they're like summoning things with their Ka and all their mystical energy and whatnot. GX said enough of that, and they just greatly expanded on the lore and basically worked overtime to prove that the cards were actual living beings. And it's very similar to Pokemon now, where if you look at the Yu-Gi-Oh card as the Pokeball and the spirit inside as the actual Pokemon, it's almost a one-to-one comparison. This is really expanded upon before they actually go to like the new Duel Monsters world that Yubel creates. Right before that, there's this whole duel where Jesse is dueling this guy who's like a card hunter, and he actually traps the spirits of the duel monsters into these little capsules so the duelists actually can't use their power, because the cards actually do have power in Yu-Gi-Oh! And so when he traps Sapphire Pegasus, Jesse's actually unable to even summon Sapphire Pegasus, and the card is blank. And then they explain that whether the duelist is aware of their duel spirits or not, they always make a bond with a certain duel spirit, and they actually will manifest them eventually, and they'll have that spirit protecting them. But if they're not aware of like the whole spiritual side of Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters, then they're unable to see them. So that's why you have characters like Alexis, who's like pretty strong, but she's not able to clearly see any of her monsters. But then you have people like Chaz, Jaden, Jesse, who are spiritually aware, and they are actually able to talk and interact with their different duel monsters. But then even outside of that, they just established that there's like aliens out there in the Yu-Gi-Oh! Universe. And it's this kind of like weird causality thing where it's like Neos is a guy from our universe that flies to other universes and interacts with aliens and stuff, and the Neospatians are this other race of aliens. And where it kind of becomes this weird causality thing is that they're said to like have already been existing, but then the cards are really based off Jaden's designs. So it's kind of like which came first. Did the Neospatians come first and they influenced Jaden's designs, or were there aliens out there and they took the shapes of Jaden's cards designs whenever they saw them? That's just something that you guys can chew on. You guys can talk about that in the comments down below. I just think it's really interesting to kind of look at it that way, because we also know that certain archetypes are just existing out there in the universe, fighting these battles for control over solar systems, galaxies, just all of this crazy nonsense. For instance, you guys might know about the worm archetype. Well, did you know that they're actually like this alien parasitic race that is just going from planet to planet, just trying to create Worm Zero and blow up the planet, basically like the life fibers from Kill la Kill. But then the Ally of Justice archetype are there to always stop them. So just out there in the universe, as we're sitting on Earth, there are worms fighting machine mech robots, fighting them out there. There's star-eating dragons. There's just a whole bunch of just absolute nonsense going on out there. This is actually explained by Darkness at the very, very, very end of Yu-Gi-Oh! GX. You would not have seen this if you watched the dub, because the dub did not cover this final arc of GX. But he basically just explains that in the beginning, there was one gigantic Yu-Gi-Oh! Card that birthed everything in the multiverse. All of the celestial bodies, all beings, come from this giant Yu-Gi-Oh! Card. So if someone tries to tell you it's just a game, bro, you can just tell them, actually, no, everything is real inside of the game. We all live in a giant Yu-Gi-Oh! Card, man. And then everything technically even, it just is a Yu-Gi-Oh! Card. I'm telling you, the last arc of Yu-Gi-Oh! GX gets a little bit crazy. But I say all this to kind of just reinforce that, yeah, all of the feats that we're going to get into for Yu-Gi-Oh! GX and everything that Jaden does is very legitimate because of how GX portrays all of these beasts. They portray them as actual living entities that are more or less sealed inside of like certain cards, and people draw out that power when they summon them. So that intro aside, we can actually move into the big first major feat that Jaden displays, and that is his fight against Kagemaru. Kagemaru is basically the first titular antagonist of the Yu-Gi-Oh! GX series, and he uses 3 monsters called the Sacred Beast. Now, apparently there is a lot of misunderstandings for the Sacred Beast. I don't know if people just didn't watch Yu-Gi-Oh! GX. People think they're ripoffs of the Egyptian god cards when it's actually a bit more complex than that. They're not ripoffs at all. They're actually a reflection or a mirror of the Egyptian god cards, because the Sacred Beasts could more accurately be called the Sacred Demons, because that's what they are. There's the 3 Egyptian gods, and then there's the 3 ancient devils. They're supposed to mirror one another, and in fact, they have very similar statements to one another. The Egyptian gods and the Sacred Beasts are both threats to the planet. Interestingly enough, they do seem to have a hierarchy where the Winged Dragon of Ra is the strongest of the 3 Egyptian gods. For the Sacred Beast, it's Raphael, the blue one. And they're said numerous times to actually be on the same level of power, which makes sense because it's the gods and the demons. Although the Sacred Beasts are packing just a little bit of a more unique ability, where the Egyptian god cards have a more passive effect on the world, where they kind of just do things in the shadows. You know, someone upsets them, maybe they just send a subtle lightning bolt down to strike them down, or they appear in their dreams to haunt them. They do very subtle things. The Sacred Beast have Black Air Force energy, and when they appear, they literally suck the dual spirit out of every single monster on the planet. Meaning any monster that exists in Yu-Gi-Oh! GX got body bagged by the Sacred Beast. Whether it be your Black Luster Soldier, your Gaia, your Blue Eyes, your Dark Magician, Joey's Red Eyes Black Dragon, Pegasus, who's still floating around all of his tunes, everybody got body bagged by the Sacred Beast. And then the boy Jaden has to put them down. Now, granted, we do learn later that he did have an amp. He's basically packing the Philosopher's Stone in this duel, and that is considered to be an amp for him. As when Jaden fights them later on in the Yubel arc, he notes that the last time he fought them, he had an amp from the Philosopher's Stone that his teacher gave him whenever his teacher passed away. But it's already starting off on a pretty good foot that Jaden in the first arc is already fighting 3 beings that are strong enough to destroy the world, and with a bit of an amp, he's able to actually beat them. Although this really doesn't matter because the Sacred Beasts are essentially the comparison stick to everything else. So even if you don't think that Jaden surpassed the Sacred Beast, he fights people that are way stronger than them. Cue in the next arc, the Society of Light with Sartorius or Psyao, depending if you're watching the dub or the sub. We can call him Dio Brando because if you didn't know, in the subbed version of GX, the boy Sartorius has Dio's voice actor, which just makes the arc that much more better. Did you also know one of his cards, Arcana Force, is called The World? So if you watch Yu-Gi-Oh! GX, you can hear a Yu-Gi-Oh! Character with Dio's voice actor start screaming about the world. And funny enough, all of the other Arcana Force cards are based on the tarot cards. So he'll just start saying all the other stand names from part 3. So if you like Dio like I do, Sartorius is an absolute treat. Now, why this is more impressive than the Sacred Beast is that Sartorius is essentially the embodiment of the light of destruction. And this is something else that's set up in Yu-Gi-Oh! GX. They kind of flipped the script on a little bit of things. So in Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters, you had Light, that was good, in like Horiarty, and you had Darkness and Zork, who was bad. But in GX, they kind of flip the script a little bit. They say there's the Light of Destruction that's bad. It doesn't allow things to grow because it just destroys everything it comes into contact with. And then there's the Gentle Darkness that allows things to grow within it. And Jaden is essentially the embodiment of the Gentle Darkness, or the reincarnation of the Supreme King, but we'll get into that in a little bit. And then Sartorius essentially becomes the Light of Destruction, and they battle each other. The main thing about the Light of Destruction is that the main end goal for it is to destroy the universe. Now, there's a greater Light of Destruction that wants to destroy the multiverse, and a lesser Light of Destruction that Sartorius uses that wants to destroy the universe. Obviously, because Yu-Gi-Oh! GX goes on, Jaden does actually beat Sartorius. But there are a few interesting things to note about this duel. Towards the beginning, Sartorius kind of forces Jaden to give up this key to this satellite laser that's going to blow up the planet. And then when he tries to take the key from Jaden, Neos comes in and blocks Sartorius' Light of Destruction, this universal destroying entity. He blocks the attack. Sartorius tries to attack him again. Neos, looking annoyed, blocks it with one hand, and Sartorius concedes that while Neos is guarding the keys, he cannot get them. So not only does it scale Jaden, but it scales his monsters as well to the Light of Destruction. There's also a bit of an interesting note here for the scaling as well, is that Sartorius beats Aster Phoenix after he gets the Destiny Hero Blood D, and this is more to show that Jaden has surpassed the Sacred Beast and that Sartorius is also a greater threat than the Sacred Beast, because it's said that Blood D, or Destiny Hero Plasma for those of you that are watching in the dub, is considered to be the ultimate Destiny Hero that actually rivals the Sacred Beast, and is said by DD, who is the current dual champion and has been reigning for 10 years straight and is the current king of duelists, to be the strongest card. Blood D, very similarly to Sartorius, has been corrupted by the Light of Destruction, and very similarly to Yubel as well. And then they also parallel that its creation is very similar to that of the Egyptian god card. So essentially, they're saying Aster Phoenix has his new, like, big mumbo jumbo god card tier card. You know, that's basically Aster Phoenix's Blue Eyes. But he loses to Sartorius, so they're kind of setting up that, yeah, he's kind of surpassed where he was in the last arc. Kind of obvious, but it's a very blatant way to show that he is now above the Sacred Beast, and now he's above the Light of Destruction. But now we move into the absolute crazy feats. We move into the Yubel arc. So many people probably know about Yubel and her creating 12 different universes, but there's actually a bit of a different interpretation you could have for these statements, because Yubel says that she not only creates 12 universes, but she creates 12 dimension universes as well, which you can actually imply to mean that she's creating a 12-dimensional multiverse. Because both of the statements are not counter to one another. You can have her saying that she's creating a 12-dimensional construct, and then she's also creating 12 of the 12-dimensional constructs as well. At the bare minimum, she's creating a multiverse, which would be a 5th-dimensional feat, but at the most, she would be 12D, and obviously Jaden scales to Yubel, because they've had all of 3 duels. Now, the first duel, Jaden was kind of wetting himself. It was a little bit of a stressful situation. Jaden was stressing out. All of his friends just got blown up, or they got turned into zombies. Yubel pulled out the Sacred Beast, and he's like, oh my goodness, I gotta fight these guys again. But then his good old buddy Jesse Anderson comes in with Rainbow Dragon, and not only beats the Sacred Beast, but beats the fused version of the Sacred Beast, kind of showing that Rainbow Dragon is an absolute Giga Chad. Also, just a nice little note about Rainbow Dragon is that in the Bonds Beyond Time movie, Paradox gets the strongest monsters from every timeline. So he goes to Dual Monsters, he gets Red Eyes Black Dragon, and Blue Eyes White Dragon. He goes to 5Ds, he gets Stardust Dragon, but when he goes to Yu-Gi-Oh! GX, he gets Rainbow Dragon and Cyber End Dragon. So not only is Rainbow Dragon displaying some absolute insane power in beating the fused version of the Sacred Beast, but it's also just said to be the strongest monster in the timeline alongside Cyber End Dragon. Now, how this backscales back to Jaden is that Jaden actually has a fusion with Rainbow Neos, where he's actually able to take Rainbow Dragon and fuse it with his monster Neos. And funnily enough, this isn't even called the strongest Neos fusion. That actually goes to Storm Neos. So I guess in lore, Storm Neos is just the strongest Neos fusion, just go figure with that one. But then not only does he beat Jessie, who's possessed by Yubel, he goes on to fight Yubel herself, and even if you don't think that maybe Jaden was going to win the duel, or you don't think they were relative for whatever reason, even though Jaden was kind of smacking Yubel around for a bit, and was just talking absolute mad junk the entire time, he just blatantly fuses himself with Yubel with super polymerization. So even if you think Yubel is a lot stronger than Jaden, even if you think Yubel is like 11 dimensions stronger than Jaden or something like that, he just fuses himself with her and steals her powers. And that's when Jaden kind of becomes a complete being, where it's Jaden Yuki, the Supreme King, and Yubel all merged into one person. Obviously, in fighting and fusing with Yubel and having the power of super polymerization, Jaden obviously scales to being at bare minimum multiversal, and at the highest end being 12D. For those of you guys wondering how large the universes are that Yubel creates, they actually are said to have endless sand, so it's very similar to the Hueco Mundo statements for Bleach, where the Bleach databooks say that Hueco Mundo is infinite in size because it has infinite sand. The same thing goes for all of Yubel's dimensions. We could also talk about his duel with Darkness at the very end of the series, but that's more for inverse scaling, because essentially Darkness beats everybody. Literally everybody on the planet gets beaten by Darkness. The only person said to be left that has not been beaten by him is Jaden. So essentially that fight with Darkness just establishes the beginning lore of the series, where it's like everything comes from a giant card and the Yu-Gi-Oh cards are like the progenitor of everything. But then it also establishes that Jaden is the most powerful character in Yu-Gi-Oh GX. It also establishes that Darkness has a separate multiverse that he comes from. But again, that's kind of just more reinforcing the multiversal scaling for Yu-Gi-Oh GX. So with that being said, let's go ahead and move on to Jaden's speed. Which speed is actually really easy because there's some pretty blatant showings for how fast Jaden and his monsters should be. So probably the most obvious one is actually just Neos himself. He's just a dude that just flies around the universe, which would make him like MFTL to like MFTL plus. Just because, again, he's a dude that just flies around the universe, but he's actually arguably got infinite speed because he actually flies to the Neospatian universe, which is said to not be in our own universe. It's actually said to be a separate universe. And so the reason I say he has to have at least infinite speed is that if the universes are infinite in size, he needs to move faster than that to cross that infinite distance. Hence, he needs at least infinite speed to cross the infinite gap and get into another dimension. And that's if the Yu-Gi-Oh universes are actually just that simple. But again, we're just looking at it from the just ground level, most simple perspective. But this isn't even as impressive as it gets. So in the last 2 episodes, Jaden is actually stated to have dueled Yugi, the king of games, in a dimension with no time. This actually has 2 implications. One, dueling in a dimension that has no time and being able to move around that dimension freely means you actually have inaccessible speed. For those of you that might be newer and aren't as familiar with the speed tiers, basically you have any quantifiable amount of speed, like let's say Mach 1, or moving at 300 miles per hour, moving at 5 billion times the speed of light, anything that's quantifiable. Then you move up to infinite speed, which is, as the name implies, just having an infinite amount of speed. It's when that value just becomes infinite. Pretty simple. And then you have inaccessible speed, which is essentially taking that infinite value and adding things to it. So infinite plus 1, or infinite to the power of infinity plus another infinity. It's based on the ideas of inaccessible cardinals. And then higher than that, you have immeasurable speed, where you can no longer measure the speed by any quantification. So essentially just think of inaccessible speed as like higher infinity levels of speed, and then immeasurable speed is when infinity levels can no longer be applied to said speed, which, funny enough, they actually might qualify for immeasurable speed, because in the Millennium Worlds arc in the original Yu-Gi-Oh series, Bakura actually reverses time and everybody's able to move in reverse time. So eventually they're time traveling and they're able to move freely in this time travel state. They're not locked in place or anything. They're still able to move freely, which would actually be a feat for immeasurable speed. And because Jaden is able to fight Atem and Yugimoto, and he's not getting blitzed by Atem drawing cards or anything, he's able to perceive him just fine. You could argue that Jaden also has immeasurable speed as well. The whole time nonsense is very consistent for Yu-Gi-Oh as well, because you have villains like Paradox that deal with time. There's a bunch of odd statements for things like Time Wizard, where it can just banish things to a dimension of time. Like, there's just very odd time statements here and there in Yu-Gi-Oh anyway. It seems that the author really likes to dabble with time mumbo jumbo. But let me stop stalling and go ahead and move on to the abilities, and this is going to be the long part. And I've split this into a few different sections. So we have like base Jaden abilities, then we'll move into like Supreme King, Yubel, and then his monster and spell abilities. So just to kind of keep it a little organized. So starting off with the like weird resistances that base Jaden has. For one, he's immune to sleep/empathy manipulation, as while everybody else was getting just bodied by the Moki Moki mind hacks, or the emotional hacks, whatever you want to call it, Jaden was completely unaffected by it. Even Crowler had to wear a special suit, otherwise he would have gotten bodied by that. So he's immune to that. He's unbound by fate due to his duel with Sartorius. Sartorius, also a part of being the Light of Destruction, apparently means he's also able to just read fate completely, but Jaden is the one blemish in his ability to read fate. Jaden is the one person that is just blatantly said to be unbound by fate. Also, funny enough, you have Zweistein, who is said to have the most powerful and logical human brain, and he considers Jaden to be a being that transcends all logic. And by the way, if you don't think that Zweistein is the most powerful and just complex human mind, he actually applies M theory, which isn't even possible to apply. He actually travels to other multiverses by applying M theory. So this dude is very big, massive brain, and he considers Jaden to be a logical, transcendent being. Jaden is also said to have infinite potential by Zane numerous times, and this is actually kinda backed up by the Bonds Beyond Time movie, where despite never seeing a synchro summon before in his entire life, Jaden is able to perfectly combo with Yusei with his synchro monsters. And not to throw any shade at Yugi, but Yugi kind of goes, a synchro what now? Again, not to throw any shade, but it does show that he has that infinite potential or that really high ability to adapt to new situations. In the last arc, alongside Kagemaru and Sartorius, Jaden has this precog ability where they all know that darkness is coming. And they know that because of the Sacred Beast, the Light of Destruction, and Yubel, it's weakened their multiverse to the point where darkness can now invade. So he also has like precognitive abilities. And then he also resists existence erasure, because when Fujiwara is being possessed by darkness, he says he's going to 0/erase Jaden and Jesse to a world of infinity, but then kind of just concedes that he can't do it. But then they just go on to say that this is actual existence erasure, and it's probably one of the best showings for existence erasure as well that I've seen in a long time, because usually an author will just throw that out in a verse and be like, oh, I'm going to erase their existence, and then it just ends up being like physical deletion, but people can still remember them. In Yu-Gi-Oh, when you get your existence erased, people don't remember you anymore. Like your soul, your body, the memories of you are completely wiped away. So again, not to throw shade at some other verses that I read, but when they say they have existence erasure in Yu-Gi-Oh! And they're going to erase somebody, it's pretty concrete. Like, it's like, no, this dude no longer exists. This might also be because that the being known as darkness is actually said to be the embodiment of darkness and is essentially treated as the concept of darkness in the Yu-Gi-Oh! Verse. They never outright blatantly say that he is a conceptual being. They call him an embodiment, which is close, but it's not quite being a concept. But the way that they talk about him being like a force of nature or like this universal constant is very alluded to in the fact that he is a conceptual being. So if you want to use him being said to be an embodiment to just say that he is a conceptual being along the lines of the other stuff that he says, then Jaden also has the ability to kill conceptual beings as well. Then we move into his Supreme King abilities. This gives him two notable abilities. One, he's immune to all emotional abilities. So he kind of already had that a little bit with the Moki Moki fight, but that just seems to be more like it puts you to sleep. As the Supreme King, nothing phases him. He is completely unbound by any appeals to emotions, as we see in his duel with Jim. Jim has the Orichalcum Eye that's going to help him perform a miracle, and he uses this miracle to try to appeal to Jaden's emotions, but the Supreme King is like, I am unfazed by all of that. I am immune to all interference. And then the other thing is that the Supreme King has like this passive fear hacks that almost functions as like spiritual pressure from Bleach, because he just kind of flexes his spiritual pressure, and O'Brien flees the scene out of terror, right? He is just wetting himself at the presence of Supreme King Jaden. But now let's talk about the creme de la creme. When he fused with Yubel, oh my goodness, did he get a laundry list of abilities. We are not going to go through all of them. I'm just going to give you guys the ones that I think are really relevant and are really powerful in a versus scenario. Obviously, I already mentioned that she's able to create a multiverse and possibly 12-dimensional constructs, but she also has a ability to reality warp things. Like, she's able to create snakes in Jaden's duel with Cobra, and they're said to like not have been there, and she just kind of creates them into existence and uses that to trap Jaden's friends so they can't help him in that duel with Cobra. She has a really, really strong BFR ability, where when she beats somebody in a duel, they get BFR'd to a separate dimension that is also stated to be in a place between space-time, so interpret that how you will, but when you're in that dimension, you get power nulls. So not only does she just give you the boot, but she also power nulls you while you're there. So even if you have some ability to get out of BFR, you can't do it because now you're stuck there and you're powerless. She's giving Jaden like a super high resistance to mind hacks abilities, because when Dark Fujiwara tries to mind hack Jaden, he literally just turns on the eyes and says, "Those tricks don't work on me, who are you?" This is also when Jaden got the ability to fully manifest all of the dual monsters whenever he wanted. It's kind of said that like when you summon them with the dual disc, you're drawing out their power, but Jaden draws out their true power. They don't really give us a percentage or anything for it, so it's a little ambiguous, but it's implied that when Jaden does it, they're a lot stronger than when you just summon them normally. Then Yubel has a lot of just also good mental manipulation herself, where she's able to mind hacks people like she did to Cobra. She touched him and made him think that he was living in a reality where the boy that he was trying to protect never died, and Cobra just threw himself off the edge because he thought he was walking towards that child. She has dream manipulation and will haunt people that try to go after Jaden. In fact, they've also said that they never recovered from these ailments or these hauntings that she did to them. This comes from when Kid Jaden was trying to duel people with Yubel originally, and whenever he would lose, Yubel would just put them in the hospital and they never came out. She has weird tech manipulation because when we're in the Yubel arc, she kind of just puts herself in the machinery as well. So not only is she like this crazy biologically manipulating character, but she's also got some tech manip as well. She's also really hard to kill herself because she has good regeneration. She spawns back in a stronger form if you kill her, and you can't permanently kill her because she's tied directly to Jaden. So in order to kill Yubel, you have to beat Jaden, or you have to do what Darkness did and permanently remove Yubel from Jaden. Which, due to how strong Jaden's soul is naturally with just his power, but then the Supreme King, Yubel, and people are going to make fun of me, but the teacher that's also in there is like the greatest alchemist of all time and did give him the amp to fight the Sacred Beast. So he's not a non-factor. With all of that in there, and it's just high resistance to soul attacks in general, is going to be hard to do. You can also give her the duel bracelets that they used in the Yubel arc, where basically you slap it on somebody and after a duel they expend like a week's worth of duel energy to the point where it's actually lethal to use it. And then that energy goes back to Jaden Yubel. So say he's fighting somebody and they've got like infinite stamina, he slaps that on them, boom, now Jaden also has infinite stamina, because he'll be permanently drawing off their life force. She also has a pretty good shape-shifting ability, so if you want to say that like Jaden never loses his dual disc, she could like morph Jaden's arm into her arm and then turn that arm into a dual disc, or just fully take control of Jaden's body and start throwing hands with people. She zombifies people with the power of darkness if she beats them. So if you just like throw Jaden into a verse, the more people he beats, the more people are going to be on his side. She also has a method of sealing, as she sealed Jaden inside of Rainbow Dragon, which is not even something that Darkness himself could do. Darkness couldn't get to Jesse's mind because Rainbow Dragon and the Crystal Beast were protecting Jesse's mind. But Yubel just bypassed all of that and even just sealed Jesse inside of the Rainbow Dragon. So I don't really know what she would seal other characters inside of, but like what she seals Ichigo inside of Zangetsu, some weird trippy nonsense like that, and then takes over Zangetsu. Just a bunch of weird nonsense like that is going down. Even if you don't give them access to super polymerization for whatever reason, she has the ability to fuse people with dual monsters, as she did that to some random students in the Duelist Academy, but then she also made them immune to pain as well. So you could say that, I don't know, you have Jaden fighting somebody who's like using pain hacks to try to beat him. Yubel makes him immune to pain, or just has him tough it out through everything. And then this kind of goes into the monster effect, and we'll start moving into the other monsters that Jaden has. But Yubel herself forces people to do battle with her, and it literally kills you to do so. And the great thing is that she's immune to all battle damage, and she's like really hard to kill. People might be confused because that's not how the real life Yubel works, but in the anime, it's Yubel forces people to attack her, and that's why she's actually really good in the anime. So yeah, you're forced to do battle with Yubel, then you take all of that battle damage back into yourself, and she takes absolutely nothing. But then looking at some of his other monsters, I'm not really going to go into all of the elemental heroes and the different fusions. Basically, all you gotta know is that a lot of the hero cards have basic elemental manipulation. So like Bustinatrix has fire manip, you have Avian that has some wind manipulation, Sparkman electric manipulation. So he has like some elemental abilities, so I don't know, for whatever reason, you're fighting a character that's super weak to fire or electricity. Jaden has a counter for that with the elemental heroes, but a lot of the cards are just like special summoning out different monsters or just popping a monster on the field. So you could say that he could like one-shot people with some of those cards and that he has elemental manipulation. There's also some odd things with characters like Neospatian Glowmoss or Neospatian Air Hummingbird, because Air Hummingbird does replenish his life, but it's based on the amount of cards that his opponent has. And unless he's fighting another Yu-Gi-Oh character, like if he's fighting Goku, Goku doesn't really have cards, so Air Hummingbird really wouldn't do anything. And Glowmoss has a really OP ability because it can basically shut down the battle phase. But again, it's very reliant on what your opponent draws. And again, like if he's fighting Naruto, Naruto doesn't have cards. So you could make some arguments to maybe make them work, but at the end of the day, I'm kind of excluding them because I think they're a little too wacky to use in cross-verse debates, and I think he already has enough going forward. So first, let's go ahead and look at Elemental Hero Neo. So we kind of talked about him. He's essentially just a really strong, really fast beat stick that combos really well with the other Neospatians and other elemental heroes. Although in the anime, it's more so with the Neospatians exclusively. Some of the notable fusions are Storm Neos, that is said to be the strongest hero, Rainbow Neos, that is the fusion of Rainbow Dragon and Elemental Hero Neos. There's Grand Neos, which is said to drill through space-time to bounce the opponents out. So basically, it's kind of like a BFR ability, if you want to say that Grand Mole and Grand Neos have that ability. Dark Neos not only has the ability to copy, but it can also negate the enemy's abilities. So you can kind of just treat it as stealing somebody's ability. If you have the ability to control fire or something, he can copy that and now you don't have that ability anymore because it's negated. That's pretty good. And then you have Chaos Neos that just negates everything. There's also Honest that gives the attacking monster the attacking power of the opponent's monster. So if he has Neos out and Neos is a 10 and he's fighting, I don't know, character XYZ, and that guy's got a power level of 15, well, Honest is going to add that 15 to Neos. So essentially, it's really good stat manipulation, because it should essentially always allow his monsters to be stronger than the opponent's. Then notably, the two hero fusions I want to talk about are Shining Flare Wingman and Flame Wingman, because they both force their opponent to take their own power back at themselves. So essentially, they beat up somebody, and then they make them tank their full power back at them. It's really nice to prevent some Frieza waffle from going on, you know, where like Frieza's down on the ground and you're like, okay, I think he's beaten, but then he's like, oh, actually, I'm still Spurgin. Because then not only do you beat him up, but then you make him tank his full power back at him and you're like, okay, that dude is definitely either dead or he's just not getting back up. And then just for combo pieces, he has Elemental Hero Prisma that can become any monster that Jaden needs for fusion material. Then finally, there's just a few spell and trap cards I want to go ahead and talk about. There's Negate Attack, which I talked about in the Yugi video, which is essentially a power null card. Jaden actually says that your monster gets power nulled completely, and that's where the battle phase ends. There's the Philosopher's Stone that he doesn't have anymore, but Composite Jaden should have it, and it's kind of a wombo combo card, but it's more of an amp than anything. Super Polymerization allows Jaden to fuse anything with whatever he wants, including things like the multiverse. So literally anything that he wants to fuse with, he can make it happen. And then finally, there's Final Fusion, which essentially forces a draw. And then once he forces that draw, they become a Yubel zombie. So it is pretty nice for versus debates that you could just be like, fine, I'll just set Final Fusion and I'll just force this battle to become a draw, and then you become one of my zombies and I win. So with that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. My throat is absolutely killing me because I've been talking for like 35 minutes. But you guys were asking for the Jaden Yuki video, and after watching GX, I really like Jaden. I'm like, I wanted to do him proper justice. For those of you guys asking, I'm not going to be doing any other characters from GX, but instead, I'm going to follow this video up with a Jaden versus Yugi video, because that match was left ambiguous, and if you notice, I really didn't touch it all that much in this video, because I want to have a separate discussion kind of talking about that fight. It's going to be less of a versus fight and more of a discussion because, again, the results of that fight are ambiguous, but I hope you guys are looking forward to that. If you're able to, I encourage you to come out to the stream this Saturday. I'm going to be doing a Yu-Gi-Oh! GX Power Scale, so if you're wondering, how does Sartorius compare with Kagemaru, or does Dino Bro have the strength to beat the Chaz Monjome Thunder? Come out to the stream on Saturday. I'm going to be doing a Yu-Gi-Oh! GX Power Scale. And then expect a video on Yusei Fudo sometime in the future. I'm almost done with the first arc of 5Ds as I'm recording this video, so you can expect that sometime soon. But with all that being said, I think that's everything. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. You want extra content, join, become a channel member. There's debates and past live streams, all that good stuff. But with that being said, you guys have yourselves a nice day. Peace. Late, guys.